Hi, everyone.
Hello again. We're in the Pure Worship book, but we don't have a literal book in front of us. So what we're going to do is work from the screen. So if we look awkward and we're fumbling around, that's because we're going from the screen from which we're reading the book back to the camera. Mm-hmm. So if you see us
looking in the wrong direction, that's why. Or looking stranger than usual.
Yeah. So let's go to the book and see what the Watchtower has to say about the enemy of pure worship. Mm-hmm. This is on page 9 of the Pure Worship Restored to Mankind book. Mm-hmm. This is paragraph 12. They've just been discussing the Matthew 4 passage where Christ is tempted by the devil. And about that, they say, with the final temptation, Satan confirmed that he is the original enemy of pure worship. Thousands of years earlier, in the Garden of Eden, Satan first revealed his hatred for worship of Jehovah by seducing Eve, who in turn persuaded Adam to disobey Jehovah's command. Satan brought them under his leadership and control. In reality, he became their God, and they became his worshippers, even though they may not have known the real identity of the one misleading them. Furthermore, by instigating that rebellion in Eden, Satan not only challenged Jehovah's sovereignty or right to rule, but also launched an attack on pure worship. How so?
The issue of sovereignty involves pure worship. Only the true sovereign, the one who created all things, is worthy of worship. When Jehovah created the perfect Adam and Eve and placed them in the Garden of Eden, he purposed that eventually the entire earth would be filled with perfect humans who would willingly give him their worship, pure worship from pure hearts. Satan challenged Jehovah's sovereignty because he coveted that which rightly belongs only to the sovereign Lord Jehovah, worship.
Did Satan succeed in his attack on pure worship? He managed to turn Adam and Eve away from God. Ever since, Satan has waged war against true worship, seeking to turn as many as possible away from Jehovah God. Satan did not let up in his efforts to tempt Jehovah's worshippers in pre-Christian times. In the 1st century CE, he wickedly stirred up an apostasy by means of which the Christian congregation became corrupted and pure worship eventually seemed lost. And there they reference, by the way, the wheat and the weeds, the sower parable, those two first parables. And also Acts 20, 29, and 30 about the oppressive wolves coming in. The same proof text, unfortunately, they always use. Back to the text. Beginning in the 2nd century CE, worship presented a long period of spiritual captivity to Babylon the Great, the world empire, false religion, but Satan has not succeeded in defeating God's purpose regarding pure worship. Nothing can stop God from fulfilling his purpose. His name is involved, and he always lives up to his name. Jehovah is the unfailing fulfiller of his purpose.
Okay, so we'll go back to the beginning.
All right, back to paragraph 12. I guess the first problem that stares at me from paragraph 12 in the middle of it is, in reality, he became their God and they became his worshippers. You read the text, which they've told us to do here. Is there anything in it about worship?
No. There's no worship. There's no Satan. There's a serpent in the garden. So a lot of stuff is just introduced, and you're supposed to just accept it. So they want to give you ideas to stick in your head.
It's all about sovereignty, according to them. But all you have in that passage, if you read it and take it seriously, literally, is 3 personages and a serpent.
Yeah. And it's not, they're not even worshiping him. They're talking with him, they're walking with him. It's a communion with God, a fellowship or a relationship with God that's being emphasized in the passage. They don't need a mediator because they have that direct connection with God. That's what they lost in the garden. Here they said something about them being perfect.
I think that's in the next paragraph.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but we can talk about it. But in respect to this, that you've got this, what you call pure worship going on, and it was somehow lost There's nothing in the text, though, about, like you said, about them worshiping God.
Yeah.
It's a relationship.
Yeah.
It's a communication, and you called it communion. I think that's the best word. So,
Yeah.
in a way, witnesses have been, I wouldn't say in a way, very overtly, they've been robbed of the thing that needs to be restored the most, which is a direct relationship with their Creator.
Yeah.
And that's what he had in mind.
That was what was lost in Eden.
And this notion of perfection, I know you've got some strong thoughts on that.
Well, I think in the previous one they talked about it being his perfect will that there be, well, let's look at 13 anyways.
This right here. And he purposed that eventually the entire earth would be filled with perfect humans.
Yeah, so that's all fantasy too, because it never calls them perfect. And I was surprised by that. When I looked up the word perfection or perfect, and I was expecting to see it right away in Genesis, I didn't find it.
You found good?
In connection with Adam and Eve. Yeah, good I found. But not perfect. They weren't perfect.
So who's perfect?
Jehovah. The first time it mentions perfect, it's about God. He's perfect.
Now we know Jesus was perfect, right? He's the only other perfect human, but another surprise.
Yeah, he's made perfect.
Hebrews 5.
Through his suffering.
He is made perfect by the things he suffers. So there's no perfect humans, and therefore there's no pure worship on earth possible.
Yeah.
And all of the people who we call pure worshipers in the Old Testament are actually offering sacrifice for their own sin, for their community sin, and for the national sin. Over and over again you see that pattern.
Yeah.
Right past the days of Daniel and into the days of Ezra and Nehemiah at the end of the Old Testament.
Yeah. I think somebody has said, like, for perfection is only something that God could have.
Yeah.
Because he'd be creating himself.
Yeah, we're growing unto God or into God. Mm-hmm. We're even called partakers of the divine nature in 2 Peter. But not that we'll be ever God, but that God is sharing himself with us.
Yeah.
And that's the way it was set up to be in the beginning. So this idea of a earth filled with perfect humans.
Yeah.
Well, Isaiah explicitly says, the best window we have into the millennium, says that people will be dying during the millennium.
Yeah. So that's Isaiah 65, right?
65.
Yeah.
So how do we reconcile that with perfect humans living forever on earth unto a test at the end of the millennium?
Yeah.
It's just not there.
Yeah.
And then in this 14th paragraph, what's really shocked me is they jump over all of history from Eden to the 2nd century CE. Suddenly we're at the end of the 1st century, and we're talking about the spiritual captivity to Babylon the Great. Why did they feel it necessary to omit 4,000 years?
I think because if you start to look at the history of Israel, you're quickly going to see they're not pure worshipers. Even and they're God's people. He's taken them not because they were great, not because they were faithful. He elects a nation in which he's going to display his character so that everyone can see it, not just them, but all the nations will see how he deals with his people.
So his relationship with his people in the Old Testament, which is completely omitted here,
is
one of unconditional love to an erring nation, a rebellious nation, even an idolatrous nation.
But they're always called God's people, even at their worst.
Yeah.
When he exiles them, he still calls them his people.
So this idea that suddenly, as soon as the apostles were dead, everything goes back to pre-Abraham. There's no longer a God's people on earth.
Yeah.
So how does it work that nothing can stop God from fulfilling his purpose? They have said in paragraph 14.
I think a close examination makes you realize that, just like Jesus said, wheat and weeds would be the way things are for the church. It was the same way with Israel, wheat and weeds.
Mm-hmm.
There was always a remnant of people who were sincerely trying to please God and worship him and do what he said.
Bearing fruit.
bearing fruit.
according to that analogy.
But not perfect. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't pure. Even theirs wouldn't have been pure because we're all sinners. So it's about God, not the people.
I think it's just
wanting to justify yourself.
It's unbelievable that they could say, but Satan has not succeeded in defeating God's purpose regarding pure worship. When you've just said Israel failed, that's the assumption behind your view of yourselves.
And only one generation of Christians.
Let's give them
two
generations of Christians were pretty good.
But as soon as the apostles were dead, everything went to pot.
So how's that again? Let's reread that last sentence. His name is involved, and he always lives up to his name. Well, he didn't, did he? His name disappeared. You say
had to restore
the name
it.
disappeared.
That's what you say.
So for 1,800 years, plus all the time that he was putting up with Israel, his name has been profaned, as Ezekiel 36 puts it, profaned among the nations.
Can we go back to 13? The last sentence in 13 said, Satan challenged Jehovah's sovereignty because he coveted what rightly belonged only to the sovereign Lord Jehovah, worship. So I thought we should talk about, if you believe that as a witness, that Jehovah is the only one that deserves worship, I think you should have a problem with the way things are in the Watchtower, especially now. It's more direct, I would say, more...
obvious?
Yeah, it's not subtle. I think when we were there, it was a little more subtle. But you were offering, what's the term, unquestioning loyalty to the organization.
Yeah.
You had to believe whatever they told you, even if it didn't sit right with you, you didn't get it, you didn't understand it, you still had to say you believed it.
Mm-hmm.
They asked that of you. Is that not worship? Now they're saying you must believe the governing body, who are the FDS. At least when we were around, the FDS, you kind of didn't know who they were. It was very mysterious.
144,000 was the official teaching.
Yeah, so they were all over the place, and you felt that somehow God was working it, that the governing body was getting that information and then giving it to us. So there was a lot more mystery in it. But now it's just blatant, and they are the FDS now. And they want you to obey them, even when it's, what's the phrase lately they've been saying? Even if it seems... unreasonable or strange or
what they tell you to do.
You still do it.
Well, this is the kind of loyalty or submission that only God has the right to demand.
So they're asking you to worship the governing body, the 8 men.
Now we have said over the years that in effect, subtly, but in effect, the Watchtower has always been Jehovah. That is the Jehovah you worship. Yeah. But it's, like you said, it's far more obvious now that that's what they're asking of you.
Yeah.
Exclusive devotion.
Yeah.
What are our links?
We are linking to, the first one was one I did, Jehovah's Witnesses, Eternal Life Shallow. What did Adam and Eve lose? Merely endless existence? The second one was one you did, 3 myths, JWs or ex-JWs, except about the early church.
Yeah, that's based on the lectures of the great Christian historian Burnett Streeter. 3 myths that we still accept, many of us anyway, when we leave the Watchtower, about the early church. See you next time.